I was 31 years old when I returned to the country my mother came from. I had grown up in London, but she was born in a small village by a wide river in Ghana. When she died, she left me a small box. Inside it were 2 photos, an old necklace, and a folded piece of paper with an address written in faded blue ink. I had never seen that address before. It said, Nsaba Village near Cape Coast. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the box open in front of me. It was raining outside, and I could hear cars passing through the wet street. I kept looking at the photos. One was of my mother as a young girl. She stood near a mango tree with a woman who looked like her but older. I guessed that was my grandmother. The other photo was of a little house made of clay, with a wooden door painted blue. I felt something strange inside me, like a small pull. It was not sadness and it was not fear. It was something in between, something that whispered, "Go there." That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the house and the faces in the picture. My mother never spoke much about her life before coming to England. She arrived when she was 20, alone, with only one suitcase and a quiet smile. When I was a child, I used to ask about her family, but she always said they were gone. I did not know if that meant dead or far away. When I grew older, I stopped asking. Our lives were busy, and she worked hard. She was a nurse for 30 years and never went back home, not even once. But in her last months, when she was weak and tired, she sometimes looked at the sky through her hospital window and whispered, "I wonder if they still remember me." That memory came back to me the morning after her funeral. I looked at the box again and felt sure I needed to go to that village. I wanted to understand where she came from and what she had left behind. Maybe, I thought, I could find someone who remembered her. Maybe, in that village, there was still a part of her story waiting for me. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city, which country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to hear more emotional stories like this every week. I booked my flight 2 weeks later. It was my first time traveling to Ghana. When the plane landed in Accra, the air felt heavy and warm, filled with the smell of earth after rain. I took a deep breath and looked around. Everything felt new and familiar at the same time. The people, the colors, the sound of voices, it all made me feel alive in a strange, gentle way. At the airport, I met a taxi driver named Kweku, who agreed to take me to the Cape Coast. The drive was long, almost 3 hours. I watched from the window as the city turned into green fields, and the road became smaller and quieter. There were palm trees on both sides, and sometimes goats walked slowly across the road. Kweku asked me why I was traveling alone, and I told him I was visiting my mother's village. He nodded and said, "Ah, going home." The word home stayed in my mind. I had never called Ghana home. I had never been there before, and I did not speak the language. But something about the way he said it made me wonder if home could be more than a place. Maybe it was a feeling you did not know you had until you arrived. When we reached the village, the air was quiet except for the sound of children playing somewhere far away. The houses were small and close together. Some were made of cement, some of red clay. I saw women sitting outside cooking over small fires, and the smell of smoke and palm oil filled the air. I showed the address from my mother's paper to a man standing by a tree. He smiled and said something in Fonte, the local language. I did not understand, but he pointed down a narrow path. I followed it, holding my small bag tightly. My heart beat fast as I walked past the houses, looking for the one from the photo. When I saw it, I stopped. The house was smaller than I had imagined, and the blue paint on the door had faded to a pale color. But it was the same wooden door, the same small window, the same shape as in the photo my mother had kept all her life. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to do. Then slowly I walked closer. A woman came out from behind the house. She was old, maybe in her 70s, wearing a long green dress and a headscarf. She looked at me carefully and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Her English was clear and soft. I felt my mouth go dry. "I am looking for someone who lived here a long time ago," I said. "Her name was Ajoa." The woman's eyes widened. She stepped closer, her face full of surprise. "Ajoa," she said, and then she smiled in a sad, beautiful way. That was my sister. For a moment, I could not move. My chest felt tight, and I did not know whether to cry or laugh. I opened my bag and took out the photo. "This is her," I said. The woman took it in her hands and looked at it for a long time. Her hands shook slightly. "Yes," she said softly, "that is her. You are her daughter." She looked at me as if she was seeing a ghost. Then she touched my face gently, like she wanted to be sure I was real. "We thought she was gone forever," she whispered. "She left, and we never heard from her again. Her name was Amma, and she invited me inside. The house was simple, with 2 small rooms and a few wooden chairs. The air smelled of earth and soap. On the wall, there was an old photo of 2 girls standing together. One of them was my mother. The other was Amma. I felt a deep warmth in my chest. I had never seen my mother smile like that before. Amma made tea and sat with me. She told me how Ajoa had left the village many years ago to work in the city. Later, she went abroad to study nursing. She had promised to write, but after some time, the letters stopped. The family waited for years. Some said she must have died. Others said she had started a new life and did not want to return. When Amma said that, I felt a small pain inside me. I thought of my mother's quiet face, the way she always kept her feelings hidden. I realized she must have carried that silence with her all those years in London. The distance between her and her sister had been more than miles. It was time, loss, and regret. Amma showed me an old necklace, almost the same as the one in my mother's box. "We made these together when we were young," she said. "One for her, one for me." I looked at it and smiled through tears. I had the other one in my bag. It felt like a small piece of a puzzle finally found its place. As the sun began to set, the light in the room turned golden. The air felt peaceful. I looked around and thought about how strange life was, how a simple box, a few photos, and a piece of paper had brought me across the world to this moment. For the first time, I felt close to my mother in a way I had never felt before, not in memory, but in truth. That night, I stayed in the village. Amma gave me a small bed with a blue sheet, and I could hear the sound of the river in the distance. It was the same river my mother had played beside as a child. I closed my eyes and imagined her there, running along the bank, laughing, not knowing that one day her daughter would come back to find her roots. When I woke up, I knew my journey was not over. I wanted to learn more about her family, her past, and the life she had before me. I wanted to understand not only who my mother had been, but who I was because of her. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now let's continue. The next morning, I woke up early to the sound of roosters calling and children laughing somewhere outside. The air was cool, and soft light came through the small window. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the necklace on the chair beside my bed, and I remembered everything. I was in my mother's village. I was in the place where her story had begun. Amma was already awake when I came out. She was cooking porridge over a small fire. She smiled when she saw me and handed me a wooden bowl. The porridge was warm and sweet with sugar. I thanked her and sat on a wooden stool outside the house. The sky was pink and gold, and I could see the river shining far away through the trees. While we ate, Amma told me more about her sister. She said that when they were young, they did everything together. They helped their mother fetch water from the river and sold vegetables in the market. When my mother turned 16, she wanted to become a nurse. Amma laughed and said that everyone in the village thought she was too young to dream so big, but Ajoa had been strong-willed and brave. She left for the city with a small bag and some money their mother gave her. Amma's voice grew softer as she spoke. She said my mother had written letters at first. They were full of excitement about the city and her new studies, but after a few years, the letters stopped. Then one day, a man brought a message that she had gone abroad to study in England. After that, nothing. When Amma finished speaking, we both sat quietly for a long time. The only sound was the fire and the birds. I thought about how far my mother must have felt from this place. She had built a life in another world and never looked back. Yet even in her silence, she had kept the photo and the necklace. Deep inside, she must have missed them. Later that day, Amma took me to meet some of the neighbors. They were kind and curious. An old man named Kojo said he remembered when Ajoa left the village. He told me she had promised to return one day. I smiled politely, but my heart felt heavy. I wished she had been able to keep that promise. Amma also introduced me to her daughter, Essie. She was in her 40s and worked as a teacher in the nearby town. Essie spoke fluent English and helped me understand when the others used words in Fonte. She said she had heard about me from her mother, but never thought she would actually meet me. She looked at me with gentle eyes and said, "You look like her, especially the way you hold your face when you listen." In the afternoon, we walked to the river. The path was narrow and green with tall grass on both sides. When we reached the water, the air smelled fresh and sweet. I could see small children playing near the edge and women washing clothes. I took off my shoes and stood with my feet in the cool water. I felt calm and connected. "This is where we used to play," Amma said softly. "Your mother loved this river more than anything. She said it made her feel free." I closed my eyes for a moment. I tried to imagine her as a young girl standing in this same place, laughing with her sister, dreaming about the world beyond the hills. For the first time, the image did not feel far away. It felt real and close. That evening, Essie invited me to her house for dinner. It was a short walk from Amma's place. The meal was simple and delicious, with rice and fish cooked in a spicy sauce. Essie's husband, Daniel, was quiet but friendly. He asked me about my life in London. I told him I worked at a library and that I lived alone in a small flat. He smiled and said that sounded peaceful. After dinner, Essie brought out an old album. The pages were yellow, and the photos were black and white. Some of them were cracked at the edges. She pointed to a picture of two young girls in school uniforms. "That's my mother and your mother," she said. This was before she left. I touched the photo gently. My mother's eyes looked bright and full of hope. I realized I had never seen her so young, before the weight of the world had changed her. I wondered what she had felt when she first stepped onto the plane to England. Was she afraid? Excited? Did she look back one last time? That night, when I went back to Amma's house, I could not sleep. The moonlight came through the small window, and the sound of crickets filled the room. I thought about how little I had known about my own mother. I had grown up thinking she was simply quiet and private, but now I saw there was more behind her silence. There had been longing, loss, and perhaps guilt for leaving. I also began to see myself differently. In London, I had always felt a little out of place. I was too English for some people and too Ghanaian for others. I never felt that I truly belonged anywhere, but sitting there in that small house, I began to feel something change. I belonged here, at least in part. This land, these people, were part of me. The next day, Amma said she wanted to take me to the family graves. We walked together in the afternoon sun. The path went past the river and through a field full of cassava plants. The graves were behind an old church made of stone. Some of the names were too faded to read, but Amma pointed to one and said, "That was our mother." I knelt beside it and placed a flower I had picked on the way. I whispered a small prayer, even though I was not sure what to say. I only wanted her to know that her daughter's daughter had come home. For a moment, I felt a quiet peace that I could not explain. When we were leaving, Amma told me there was one more place she wanted to show me. It was the old market square. The ground was dusty, and most of the stalls were empty because it was late in the day. She pointed to a corner near a big tree. "Your mother used to sell fruit there when we were girls," she said. I stood there for a while, looking at the spot. I could almost see her there. A young girl calling out prices, laughing with friends, full of dreams about the world beyond this small town. It made me smile. That evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, Amma and I sat outside the house. The air was full of the smell of cooking fires and the sound of soft voices. She said, "You must stay a few more days. There is more you should know." I agreed. I did not want to leave yet. Each day here felt like another page in a story I had never read before. I was learning not only about my mother, but also about myself. I began to write notes in a small journal I had brought with me. I wrote about the river, the smell of the earth after rain, and the way Amma smiled when she spoke about the past. On the fourth day, Essie came to visit again. She told me that an old man in the next village used to know my grandfather. His name was Mensa, and he was almost 90 years old. She said he might remember something important about our family. The next morning, we went to see him. The road was long and dusty, and we took a small motorbike that Essie borrowed from a neighbor. When we arrived, Mensa was sitting outside under a tree. His hair was white, and his eyes were sharp and kind. Essie explained who I was. The old man looked at me for a long time before speaking. He said, Ajoa's child. I remember her father. He was a proud man, a fisherman. He always said his daughters would see the world one day. Then he told us something that made my heart beat faster. He said that long before my mother was born. Their family had come from another village near the coast. They had moved after a fire destroyed many homes. Some people said the fire had started near the old fort, where ships once came long ago. When he said that, I felt a deep curiosity. I wanted to see that place. Maybe, I thought, that was where everything had begun. Mensah said he could show us the next morning if we returned early. That night, I lay awake again, listening to the quiet sounds of the village. I felt that I was standing at the edge of something important. The past was opening slowly, piece by piece, and I wanted to see what waited behind it. The morning sky was still gray when I woke up. The air was fresh, and I could hear the sound of birds in the trees. I packed my small bag and met Essie outside. We were going to see the old man again, so he could take us to the village by the coast. Amma gave me a small piece of bread and told me to take care. She looked proud but also a little sad, as if she already knew this visit would change something in me. Essie and I rode the motorbike through quiet roads. The air was cool and smelled of salt as we came closer to the sea. The land became flatter, and soon I could hear the sound of waves. When we reached the old man's home, he was waiting for us under the tree, wearing a white shirt and holding a walking stick. He smiled and said, "It is good that you came. The place is not far." We followed him along a path between palm trees. It took about half an hour to reach the coast. The sea stretched wide and blue in front of us. The beach was empty except for a few fishing boats. There were small wooden houses near the water, and in the distance, I could see the ruins of an old white building. It looked like a fort. The old man pointed to it. "That is where it began," he said quietly. "Long ago, before your grandmother's time, this was where many people were taken from. Some never came back. The fire that made your family leave started near there. Many believed the land carried bad memories." I stood there and felt the wind on my face. The waves came and went, slow and steady, like breathing. I did not know what to say. The fort looked silent now, but I could almost feel the pain that had lived there. It was strange to think that my family, somewhere far in the past, might have walked on this same sand. Essie and the old man walked a little ahead. I followed slowly, watching the sea. I thought of my mother again. Maybe she had known about this place. Maybe she had felt the same pull I was feeling now, but she had been too afraid to return. I wished I could tell her that I understood. When we reached the old fort, the man stopped. The walls were broken, and the paint was gone in many places. The door was open, and we stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of salt and stone. The rooms were empty except for a few broken chairs and a wooden table. Light came through small windows near the top of the walls. "This is where traders lived," the man said. "But below there are dark rooms. Many people do not go down there anymore." The place remembers. I did not want to go down either, but something in me said I should. I wanted to see, to understand. So I asked if I could. The man nodded slowly and said, "Be quiet and respectful. It is a place of spirits." The stairs were narrow and cold. My hand touched the wall, and I could feel the rough stone under my fingers. When I reached the bottom, the air was heavy. It was quiet except for the sound of the sea above. I stood there for a moment, not moving. The light was weak, but I could see the marks on the walls, old and faded. I thought of all the people who had once been here, waiting, afraid, lost. I felt tears in my eyes, but I did not wipe them away. It was not only sadness, it was something larger, something that filled the room and wrapped around me. I felt small but also connected, like a thread in a long piece of fabric. These people, whoever they were part of the story that had led to me. I was standing in the same air that had once held their voices. When I went back up, Essie was waiting at the top of the stairs. She looked at me and did not speak. She could see that I needed silence. We walked back outside and sat near the beach. The old man sat with us and looked at the sea. He said, "Your mother's grandmother was born not far from here. She was one of the few who stayed when others left. She used to tell stories about this place, but people stopped listening. Everyone wanted to forget. But forgetting never truly works. The sea brings everything back." I watched the waves again. I thought about how my mother had crossed another sea when she left Africa. She had carried silence with her, but that silence was full of memories she could not name. I began to understand that coming here was not only about her or me, it was about all of us, past and present. After a while, the old man stood up. He said it was time to go before the tide came in. I thanked him for bringing me here. He smiled and said, "Now you know, you carry their strength too." We rode back to the village in the afternoon. The road was quiet and I felt calm. I knew I would not forget what I had seen. When we arrived, Amma was waiting by the door. She hugged me tightly. She did not ask what I had seen. She only said, "Your mother would be proud." That evening, I sat outside under the stars. The sky was full of light, and the air was soft. Children were laughing somewhere far away. I opened my journal and began to write again. I wrote about the sea, the old fort, and the quiet rooms below. I wrote about my mother and how much she must have carried in her heart. And I wrote about how I felt now, lighter, clearer, and somehow whole. In the days that followed, I stayed longer in the village than I had planned. I learned small words in Fonte. I helped Amma cook and wash clothes by the river. I visited the small school where Isi taught and met the children. Each day, I felt more at peace. The land began to feel familiar, as if it had been waiting for me all along. One morning, I walked back to the river alone. The water moved gently, shining in the sun. I sat by the bank and looked at my reflection. For the first time, I saw not only myself, but also all the faces that came before me. My mother, her sister, their parents, and all those who had lived and left and loved. I realized that identity was not only about where you lived or what you looked like. It was about memory, connection, and the courage to face the past. I took the two necklaces, mine and Amma's, and held them together in my hands. They were almost the same, but one was darker with age. I thought of keeping them both, but then I smiled. I took a thin thread and tied them together. "Now they can stay," I said softly. When it was time to return to London, Amma walked with me to the road where the taxi waited. She held my hands and said, "Do not forget us." I promised that I would not. She smiled and said, "You will come again. Once you know where your roots are, you always return." The drive back to the city felt different from the one that had brought me there. I watched the fields and the trees pass by and felt grateful. I had come with questions, but I was leaving with understanding. My mother had left her home to build a life. I had come back to find the home she had lost. When I reached London, the air felt cold and gray. I placed the box on my table again. It was no longer a mystery. The photo, the paper, and the necklace were now pieces of a story I finally understood. I opened the window and let the sound of the street fill the room. For the first time, it did not feel like the only world I belonged to. That night, I dreamed of the river. I saw my mother standing on the bank, young again, smiling and calling to me. I walked toward her, and the water was warm around my feet. She said, "You found me." I said, "Yes, I did." Then she turned and walked into the sunlight, and I followed until everything became light. When I woke up, I felt calm. I knew that she was part of me, and through her, so were all those who had come before. The journey had ended, but something new had begun inside me. I finally understood the truth my mother had carried in silence. You can live far away, you can forget names and places, but the roots of who you are never disappear. They wait for you, patient and strong, until you return to find them. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.